Krypto. Home. Take me home.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and I'm trapped in the TV, but I don't know it, so please don't tell me. And this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the first trailer for James Gunn's Superman. Guys, I am so unbelievably hyped for this movie. Like, if you watch this channel a lot, you know that Superman is my favorite superhero. I have a picture of Christopher Reeve on my wall, and I think that James Gunn is creating something here that's very special and is going to feel old and new and make Superman the premier hero of our generation once again. So we are so excited to break this trailer down for you, but first I want to give you a little bit of background on how we got here with this new relaunch, and I want to let you guys know that we are relaunching our live show next year as a kind of Pee-wee's Playhouse for nerds. We are going to have special guests, exclusive breakdowns, puppets, and we're going to be in 8 cities in 2025: LA, Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, Philly, Charlotte, Atlanta, and Orlando. And at the end of this video, we have a special sneak peek at the new show I'm so excited for you guys to see. A link for 20% off tickets is down below. Now, we got our first look at the movie earlier this week when Gunn unveiled the motion poster of David Corenswet's Superman flying upwards with 50 glorious seconds of the score. So that score is actually taking motifs from John Williams' classic Superman score, but kind of burying them. Almost like the Superman that we know and love is slowly emerging onto our screens once again. The poster also unveiled the new tagline, "Look Up." Now, obviously this comes from the popular intro to the iconic Max Fleischer animated serials.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman!
But in a meta sense, I think that Gunn is telling us that his Superman will not only be more like that classic version, but that he is going to be a ray of hope. Like Zack Snyder's Superman was much more muted and understated. He was never really sure if he even wanted to be Superman. He was a person who was racked with self-doubt. Now, here on the channel we have talked at length about how I think that version of Superman is interesting, but is ultimately not really Superman.
Wait a minute, I'm confused. This isn't Henry Cavill? We're getting a new Superman already?
You know, good point. So let me give you guys a quick rundown on why we're getting a new Superman and what this new DC universe actually is, because I will admit it does get a little confusing. So in 2013, Warner Brothers charged Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan with starting an interconnected universe of DC films that would rival the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And they gave it a confusing name. It was called the DC Extended Universe, and it kicked off with Man of Steel. Now, some fans, like myself, did not like the darker, muted color interpretation that Snyder created. In fact, I hated it. But the box office was solid, and Warner Brothers doubled down, asking Snyder to introduce as many heroes as possible in the sequel, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, so then they could start hyping a crossover movie, in fact 2 crossover movies that would have been directed by Snyder. But there was pretty big fan backlash over BVS about the tone and the plot.
Save Martha!
So Warner Brothers did a hard pivot. They hired Joss Whedon to fun up the Justice League, which was, of course, a total disaster. The next few movies in this universe varied wildly in tone and story, and at one point The Rock was even being given the keys to the kingdom when he tried to build the universe toward a fight between Black Adam and Henry Cavill's Superman.
It's been a while since anyone's made the world this nervous.
But like immediately after Henry Cavill returned, Warner Brothers placed James Gunn in charge of a new, rebooted universe now simply called the DCU. So this new universe would keep some of the stories from the old DCEU, like Gunn's Suicide Squad film and in the show Peacemaker, while most of those stories, Shazam, Superman, Ben Affleck's Batman, Flash, all of that is jettisoned. Now, I do think that Henry Cavill could have been a great Superman with the right writer and director behind him, but Gunn opted for a new Man of Steel in a more fantastical universe. In this universe, superheroes have been around for a while. In fact, several heroes are already confirmed to appear in this movie, like Hawkgirl, Metamorpho, Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, the Engineer, Supergirl, and Krypto.
Krypto? Like the fake money on the internet?
No, Krypto like Superman's dog.
Oh, I gotta see this movie.
Now, Superman is my favorite superhero. I relate to a country boy who moves to the big city and wants to make the world a better place. But also, I think that we can all relate to Superman because he's a survivor of real trauma, the destruction of his homeworld, the deaths of his adopted parents. Now, luckily, he's able to work through his trauma by fighting supervillains, but for most of us, we have to find other ways to cope with our anxiety, depression, and stress. Like for years, I bottled up all of my social anxiety, especially after COVID, and I didn't deal with some really traumatic stuff from my past before I finally dealt with it through therapy through BetterHelp, the sponsor of this video. I connected with a great therapist through BetterHelp, and in our first session, she pointed out things about myself that I never realized, which have now changed how I interact with people in my everyday life. After just a few sessions, my therapist made me realize realize that all the things I was afraid of didn't really affect my life in the grand scheme of things, and I will always be grateful to her for how she helped me. It was like therapy lifted a huge weight off of my shoulders. And this is all because BetterHelp makes therapy easy. It's an online platform where clients and therapists can communicate. I used it for video chat, but I was also sent worksheets that help me work through my problems. BetterHelp also has services like a reflection journal or group sessions on a number of different topics. And I should say that you don't need to have a clinical medical issue like depression or anxiety to benefit from therapy. Like, I think of therapy as a necessary part of my mental health. You go for a checkup for your body, so you also should see a professional about your mind. Starting BetterHelp was easy. You fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as 2 days. And if the therapist isn't the right fit, you can switch until you find the right person. They also carefully make sure that therapists on the platform are well qualified and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. BetterHelp has more than 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, so this is a platform that you can trust. So if you're struggling and you think you'd benefit from a therapy session, click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/ScreenCrush for a discount on your first month of therapy. I highly recommend it. Now, back to Superman. All right, so let's get into this breakdown. Technically, this is the third project of the new DCU. The first was the excellent tear-jerking documentary Super/Man about Christopher Reeve, and the second project is the excellent show Creature Commandos, which we cover here on the channel. Now, this film, though, is going to truly launch the new live-action cinematic DCU. So the trailer opens with Superman crashing down to Earth. Now, a lot of people may not like that our first glimpse of this Superman is him being like in the snow, beaten and defeated, but personally, I love it. I think it's great to see a Superman who can actually get his ass kicked. The last few times we've seen Superman on screen, he's been this all-powerful godlike being, but he's not always that way in the comics. Like when John Byrne reinvented him in the 80s, he was very fragile. He had to get haircuts. Also, one of the best versions of Superman ever is from the DC animated universe, which crossed over with Batman the Animated Series. And that version of Superman, when he fought a robot, the robot could actually knock him around a little bit. So I think a Superman who is not so powerful, he's unrelatable, is a great idea. So this first shot in the Arctic is likely near Superman's Fortress of Solitude. Now, the Fortress of Solitude, of course, is in the comics, but it's also appeared in, like the original Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, and of course, there was a version of it in the Snyderverse. Now, the Fortress of Solitude is important because it is a place where Superman can literally be alone, in solitude. But that's because he is the only son of Krypton. By definition, he is alone at all times. So the Fortress of Solitude both looks like the barren landscape of Krypton, but it's also a place where he can truly just be himself. The last son of Krypton, he doesn't have to worry about people needing things from him. It's really the only place where he can just collect his thoughts and not hear the sounds of people being in distress all the time. But when we start off seeing Superman down and defeated like this, it's not just showing us that he can get beat up, it's showing us that he can get back up. And that's really important because Superman is supposed to be a beacon of hope. And he can't really be a beacon of hope for regular people if he never gets his ass kicked like regular people. Now, the way he lands is also very reminiscent of Superman first crashing to Earth. And of course, when we see Superman's origin in films and cartoons, it always begins like this. After he's sent away from Krypton, he always crash lands to Earth. So I think, in a symbolic way, this is James Gunn's way of saying that this is the start of the new DCU. Also notice, one of our editors, Randolf Nombrado, pointed out that he is laying in the fetal position. In other words, it's like he's arriving on this new universe, this new Earth, as a baby, just like he did when he was an actual literal baby. Now, I gotta say how much I love the comic accurate costume. It's just got just enough movie additions to it, like with the shoulder pads and things, to make it look like not just tights, but also the trunks. Now, David Corenswet and James Gunn actually went back and forth on whether or not to use the trunks on the suit. They ended up deciding that Superman is kind of like a pro wrestler, and the trunks will emphasize that for kids. Now, notice there is some padding in the suit, especially in the shoulder pads. Now, in the comics and in a lot of iterations of Superman, like the excellent show Superman and Lois, his suit is made by his mother. So we have this fun theory that maybe his mom made him this suit and she gave him shoulder pads for just a little tiny bit of extra protection for her boy.
Cool costume.
Thanks. My mom made it for me.
Now right here we see David Corenswet as Clark, and he looks great. Like, the change in his hair actually makes him look different as Superman. And we see he's playing the role of clumsy Clark Kent, where he bumps into this guy and he looks excited, like maybe this is his first day as an actual reporter at the Daily Planet. Now notice the newspaper headline from the Daily Planet says, "Hammer something creates havoc." Well, I don't want to get too far into speculation, but I think what we're seeing here is there definitely is some sort of supervillain attack in the city prior to this. Remember, we're coming into a Superman who's who's already been active in Metropolis, and James Gunn said that he's met all of the characters in the movie except for Lex Luthor. We're going to see their first confrontation in this film. Right here, we see the Wounded Duck. Now, that is a bar in the DC Comics, and this is a comic-accurate Daily Planet. You know, some of the movies, especially the Snyder movies, strayed away from this, but in the last teaser trailer, we actually saw this Daily Planet does have the giant globe on the roof. Like everything else in this movie, as we'll talk about in a bit, everything is designed to make it feel like you lifted it from the comic page. Now, the Superman S emblem is like such a great Easter egg for Superman fans. This is the emblem that he wore in the comic book Kingdom Come. So I don't want to like spoil the entirety of Kingdom Come because you should definitely read it. But it was created by Mark Waid and Alex Ross, and it depicts a DC universe like decades in the future where basically there are too many superheroes, they've run amok, and Superman has kind of withdrawn from the world. So it's about him coming back to himself. It's like this older Superman who's a little bit more cynical. Now, the inclusion of that logo in this movie, I could speculate all day on what it means. It could just be an Easter egg, or there's some indications later on that the public is turning on Superman. So we could see him start to withdraw, and then maybe it takes people like Lois to pull him back to humanity. And this part really, if you've seen our reaction video, you've seen me cry about this. Superman does the supersonic whistle to call Krypto. Now, the font here is the same font used in the credits of Superman 1978, which, as many of you know, is my all-time favorite superhero movie. Now, this is a new score, but it takes the leitmotif from the John Williams theme. Now, I also just want to shout out a great video essay by the channel Sideways that is about superhero themes. Specifically, it talks about the theme to Superman and how that original theme was very much based in Americana. It was inspired by a typical American march and also the wonderful Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland. So I think what we're seeing here is a universe that is inspired by Superman 78, but not trying to be a continuation of it like Superman Returns was. Then we see inside the Daily Planet. Now, James Gunn said that every character in this movie is ripped from the comics, and I don't necessarily mean adapted directly from the comics, but like I said earlier, he wants everything to seem like it was taken from the comics page. Here we see a couple of people who worked at the Daily Planet and GBS News in the comics. Pay close attention here. Clark almost runs into this guy, and he kind of goes, "Hey, Kent, what up?" That is actually Steve Lombard, the sports reporter, and the woman walking in front of him is Kat Grant. Now, Kat Grant was, like, briefly in the 80s, Clark actually became an on-air reporter for GBS News. It was very weird, and his co-anchor was Kat Grant, who we actually saw in the teaser trailer here. In the background, we do see the aforementioned GBS or Galaxy Broadcast News, and we see a news ticker here that says widespread flood, large bodies of water. It's kind of hard to make out the rest of it. This is one of my favorite Easter eggs, and Lee Mazzio, one of our editors, caught this. Clark has a jar of peanut butter on his desk, which is a deep-cut Easter egg from the comic book Superman for All Seasons when Clark had it on his desk in his room. And you guys know how much I love Superman, so me and the team were very excited to design this new Superman parody shirt for you. It says, "It's a bird, it's a plane, it's your mom." Very good, high five. Guys, we love designing these merch shirts for you, and we also are always dropping new shirts and having special deals and discounts. You can find links below, but also sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss out on any of these special deals. You guys are the reason our merch store is such a success. Thank you so much. Now, back to the trailer. Like I talked about earlier, the tagline of this movie is "Look Up," which is symbolic for all of us looking up to see Superman. But notice the first person to look up is actually Clark. The mural behind him actually looks like a printing press, and the one on the right looks like it's someone looking at a TV. I think this makes total sense because, remember, this version of the Daily Planet is very much inspired by the Art Deco design from the 1930s when Superman was first created. It's a very classical look that we also saw adapted in the excellent DCAU television series Superman the Animated Series. Now, this is great. This is his boyhood home in Smallville. Normally, when we see the family farm depicted, it's this very picturesque, Norman Rockwell, large farmhouse. The thing is, that's not exactly realistic anymore. I grew up in the country, and barely anybody, especially farmers, live in giant picturesque houses deep in a field. They live in houses like this, and normally the barn might be located a distance away. But in the late 1800s and early 20th century, that wasn't an option for people. They needed the farm close by, but now we have cars, we have trucks. Your farm can be a little bit further back on your property or further down the road. Now, Pruitt Taylor Vance plays Pa Kent. I think what they might be doing here is a relationship that Pa Kent and Clark had in both the comic book Birthright and Superman for All Seasons. Essentially, in those comic books, Jonathan Kent, He's proud of his son, but he's worried when he becomes Superman. He doesn't want to lose him. Not only does he not want to lose him physically, but he's worried that Clark will leave behind the name Kent and actually just become this other person. We saw a little bit of this, and it's so perfectly adapted in Man of Steel, when Clark says to his dad, "Am I still your son?" And then John breaks up and says, "You are my son." Now, I think this could be why Clark is comforting his father here, but, we also don't know, is Martha Kent still alive? Now, traditionally in comics and in Superman 78, Jonathan Kent usually dies first, which then teaches Clark the lesson that he can't save everybody, so he needs to save as many people as he can while he can. So it could be Martha Kent who dies early in this film.
Hey, Preston, can we get to my favorite part of the trailer?
What part's that?
With the puppy.
Yes, Krypto the super dog. Oh, then we get to the part that really broke me up. Superman calls in Krypto with his supersonic whistle. Now, he runs in, so I'm not sure if this means that Krypto can fly or not, but James Gunn has said that Krypto and Superman have a complicated relationship in this movie.
There's still something very complicated between us, so...
Like they're just now starting out and Krypto isn't fully trained. Now, including Krypto here is very important to me personally.
Yeah, and to me too, because he's a puppy, and I think we are underrepresented in these films.
Exactly. Now, Krypto the super dog was a dog from Krypton that survived and came to Earth, and he was Superman's dog all throughout the Silver and Bronze Age of comics. But in 1986, John Byrne relaunched Superman in a series that he wrote and drew called Man of Steel, and he tried to make Superman much more grounded, which frankly he needed. Superman was getting way too powerful.
It's not fair!
It's totally not fair.
But as part of that, he wanted to make it clear that Superman was the only survivor of Krypton. So Krypto was written out of the comics. And, he stayed absent from the comics for a long time. He's recently returned. In fact, he's featured in a great Supergirl series that I highly recommend to you guys. The fact that Krypto's in this movie shows this is a very, very comic accurate film. They're not afraid to be silly and have super dogs. They're going all out, taking all of the best from the comics and putting it in this movie. And then he says,
"Take me home."
Now, I think that is a very particular word choice, right? He is saying, okay, take me home, but I think he's actually saying, take me to the fans, take me to a proper adaptation of Superman. In other words, James Gunn is looking to return Superman to America. At least that's my symbolic take. He could actually mean take him to the Fortress of Solitude or to his farm. Now, James Gunn did release a long list of comics that he's adapting for this film, and thank you, James Gunn, for doing that. We really appreciate it. One of those comic books is Superman Birthright by Mark Waid and Leinil Francis Yu. Now, that comic book kind of retells the origin of Superman revealing himself to Earth for the first time. They did something new in it, though. Luthor then finds these images of Krypton, and he cherry picks from history, and then he feeds this info and images to the military and to the Daily Planet to make it look like Superman is an advanced scout who's like leading a Kryptonian invasion. Then he fakes a Kryptonian invasion of Metropolis, builds giant robots and things to make it look like Superman is culpable for this. Now, for this film, we do know that at one point from images that we've seen that Clark is taken in by the government. So I think we could be seeing something similar here. I think there is going to be a big threat in this movie we'll talk about later that is genuine, but at the point when that threat arrives, everyone on Earth already believes that Superman might be a villain, or because he's an alien that he's actually allied with this true threat. So we do see a monster here, right? We see it later in the trailer too, but right here it like lands its claw down on these gas canisters. She doesn't hear, probably because she is hearing impaired, and Superman saves her. And my goodness, what a shot, man. This to me is everything about Superman. He is the shield that protects us from events that, we can never protect ourselves from. I also want to point out how much she looks like a comic book character. Her dress and everything look like it's lifted straight from the comics from the 80s or earlier. Now, on the street, notice we see this banner for the Metropolis Meteors. Now, this is the Metropolis baseball team from the comics, and we're also going to see them in the stadium a little bit later on. And note that they are on Ross Street, which could be named after Superman's boyhood friend Pete Ross, but more than likely, we think this is named after the great artist Alex Ross, who not only drew and conceived of Kingdom Come, but he is also one of the greatest Superman artists of all time. He's famous for making photorealistic art that's painted. Trust me, the work of Alex Ross is seminal for Superman fans. He also created the Superman giant-sized comic book Superman Peace on Earth, which shows Superman on one day at Christmas trying to help people all around the world. And then we see Nicholas Hoult as a comic-accurate Lex Luthor. Now, of course, Nicholas Hoult was in the X-Men movies where he played Beast. So now we get a chance to see him go the other way and be a more villainous person. Note here that his company is called Luthor Corps and not Lex Corps. Now, that was the original name of the company in Smallville, but years later, Lex changed it from the family name to his own name. There's like some complicated stuff with Lex's dad and him having daddy issues mixed up in there that we don't have to get into in this video. Notice that somebody is on top of the Luthor core building. It's very small, but I'm willing to bet that's Superman. And then we see Luthor here looking very much like a Bond villain, like rotating this revolver. Maybe he was shooting Superman or Krypto to see if they were actually bulletproof. In that Birthright comic I talked about earlier, at first, Luthor very much thinks Superman is a charlatan who uses technology, and he could have been testing his powers here. Also notice he's got a pinky ring. So in the comics, those John Byrne comics I talked about earlier, Lex Luthor had a kryptonite ring, and this could be a version of that, even though we don't see a kryptonite gem on this, but they could have scrubbed that out for the trailers. Now, we see here that Lex is in some kind of containment facility, and that Superman is also inside of it. Now, this could be a containment facility owned by Lex, or I'm going to throw out a different theory here. We kind of see these cubes and cages around him with other people inside of them. So this reminds me of Brainiac. Now, if you're going to list like Superman's top villains, everyone's going to say Lex Luthor's first and Brainiac is second. The thing about Brainiac is there's different iterations of him, but recently the most popular one has been that he is a supercomputer who came from Krypton. And he's traveled the universe with a shrinking ray where he is able to shrink down entire cities or animals and take them with him is to kind of form like an intergalactic zoo. But for Brainiac, it's more about having a repository of knowledge. So I think Brainiac might be the big overarching villain of this movie. They have confirmed that Alan Tudyk does play a character in the film, but they haven't said who. So I think he might be voicing Brainiac. This could explain where the giant monster comes from. It was escaping from Brainiac's zoo. Also notice that when Superman breaks out of this prison, we see what looks like the sun reflected on the left-hand side of the screen. This makes me think that they're in space and Superman is able to break out because he's been replenished by the yellow sun of the Earth. Then again, the people on the left and right don't look like actual people. They look more like projections. So this could be some sort of Kryptonian technology showing him images of the Phantom Zone. We just don't know. And honestly, I don't want to know yet. I like that this trailer does not give much away about the movie, but it sells me on the tone.
Shut up and take my money!
And then we see what I think are images from the country of Baravia, which is in the comic books. Now, Baravia is a European country. It's always been ravaged by war, and it first appeared all the way back in Superman issue 2, like in the 1930s. I think this is Baravia because later in the trailer we see the country mentioned on a news ticker and a headline with people who look like this. So we see this kid raising a flag, which very much calls to the imagery of the death of Superman. Now, that was a storyline from the early 1990s where the writers killed Superman off for a few issues, brought him back. It was actually like a gateway drug for a lot of people into comic books, especially Superman comics. And the most famous image from that story was this, of Superman's cape flying like a flag after he'd been killed by Doomsday. I also want to mention that another image from that story showed Superman laying dead in the streets of Metropolis that looks very much like the first image of him that we see in this trailer. And then we see the crowd turning on Superman and throwing stuff at him, just like they do in the comic I mentioned earlier, Superman Birthright. So a big part of that comic is people being scared of Superman and him trying to convince the human race that he is there to help. And I really think that would be a great way to take this movie. You know, to put him in a situation that we've never seen in the films before, where people genuinely are scared of him. Even in the Snyderverse, people embraced him pretty fast. I mean, except for Batman. And then we see him enter Stag Industries. So Stag Industries are from the Metamorpho comics. They're basically like an evil company. Now, throughout this trailer, starting in this scene, we see images of different superheroes who are probably this universe's version of the Justice League. We think that this Justice League is actually working for Stag Industries, and that Stag Industries has loaned out their services to the government, and that they're going to try to apprehend Superman throughout the trailer. Now let's talk about the members of the Justice League that we see in this. So Guy Gardner, seen here, played by Nathan Fillion, old friend of James Gunn, was once Green Lantern, but frankly, he was a big jerk face. He's very arrogant, and he was later like replaced by a different Green Lantern. There have been a lot of Green Lanterns in the comics. I do want to shout out though that there was a great moment in the Justice League where Batman convinces him to fight him and says, "Oh, drop your shield or whatever." And when he does, Batman knocks him out with one punch. It's like the seminal Guy Guardian moment from the comics. And then we see straight from Madam Web, Isabella Merced as Hawkgirl, and this is Mr. Terrific. Then we get our first good look at this monster, which looks very Kryptonian, again calling back to my theory that it's let loose from Brainiac's ship. However, in classic Super Age comics, Superman also has various animals from Krypton in his Fortress of Solitude. We see this in another great Superman comic book, All-Star Superman, which James Gunn has said is going to be an inspiration for this film. So then we get this interesting moment where Superman and Lois are locking eyes with this weird thing in the background. So the weird thing in the background here, it doesn't really have a defined color, but later on we see that it's green. Again, makes me think this could be related to Brainiac. Brainiac in the comics originally was green, and then in the 80s, they changed his look to look more like a robot. But his ship was like his skull with tentacles and tendrils coming out of the bottom. So again, I think this is telling us that he could be the main villain of this, and that Lex is more like a secondary villain. However, I also want to point out this looks like the Superman villain, the Sun Eater, who, you guessed it, eats suns, and is one of the biggest threats Superman has ever faced. It is weird that Superman is so casual here. It makes me seem like this could actually be a dream sequence, but this is also the very first scene that they showed a photo of to show off the new suit. Another theory our team has here is that maybe Superman and Lois were talking while this was going on outside, then she had an idea of how to stop the Sun Eater, so he was like, hey, wait, say that again, that sort of thing. Also, we do see in this trailer Clark kissing Lois and also Superman kissing Lois, which very much makes me think that he has revealed his hidden identity to her, or she's figured it out. Because if he's posing as two different men and like making out with her two different times, he is just jerking her around at that point. And finally, one other theory about what's going on here. Let's just say that Stag Industries has their version of the Justice League. They're working for the government. We do know that Clark is apprehended by the government at one point. It could be that the government has told Clark, hey, you're not allowed to help. The Justice League has to handle this. So this could be him having a crisis moment where he's wondering, do I actually supersede the wishes of humanity and of the government? Do I step in to help no matter what? Now here we see Superman crying over what looks like one of his Superbots from All-Star Superman and from like classic Silver Age books. Now to me this looks like they're in the Fortress of Solitude. In Superman's Fortress of Solitude, he does have robot helpers from Kryptonian technology who he uses to help maintain his zoo and his other artifacts. Also notice that it has a blue cape, similar to some of the robots that we've seen in the comics. And here we see a shot of,
That's the Night King from Game of Thrones.
no, it's not the Night King. That is Metamorpho, who, long story short, Metamorpho was an ordinary guy. He was exposed to some gas, and it gives him the power to transform into anything except transform permanently into a human. So he's one of those superheroes, kind of like the Thing, who is always protecting humanity but outside of it. He is played by Anthony Carrigan, who also played Victor Zsasz in the Gotham TV show. Here we see buildings starting to fall like dominoes, and then a shot of Lex Luthor. Now, interesting thing here, look, it looks like he is crying. So we might see Lex have an actual emotional arc. Now, in the movies, we've always seen Lex Luthor portrayed as a very one-note individual. He's always someone who just like hates Superman for one reason or the other. But actually, Lex Luthor has a lot of depth in the comics. Like, this is a guy who's not only the smartest person on Earth, but people have always ostracized him because of how smart he is. He's somebody who has always longed for connection, and in lieu of connection, he was somebody who always tried to prove that he was better than the rest of humanity. This is why he actually doesn't like Superman, because Superman is somebody who doesn't have to work to improve himself, whereas Lex Luthor sees himself as more of a self-made man. In this shot, we see Superman in the Daily Planet pushing against that monster, and then we see Ultraman punching through a wall, and then fighting Superman in the Metropolis Meteor Stadium. Now, this is also important because, Superman is Americana. He's baseball. He's American apple pie. But remember, there was also a baseball scene featured in Superman Returns when Superman stops the jet from crashing in the middle of a Metropolis Meteors game.
And then I like this part where the puppy is saving Superman and his tail is wagging because he's so happy because he's a good boy. Yes, he is. He's a very good boy.
He is a very good boy. And then we see this shot of Mr. Terrific protecting Lois Lane. Now, they're surrounded by these tents that we saw in the teaser trailer, and Mr. Terrific using force fields to protect him and Lois Lane. And it looks to me like they are protecting them from these Lex bots.
What's a Lex bot?
Well, in the comic books, Lex Luthor has like his own private army. Sometimes they're guys in suits, sometimes they're robots. Now here they're wearing green and purple, just like the classic Lex Luthor armor from the Silver Age Lex Luthor stories, where he would actually try to fight Superman physically. We also think this is taking place in Baravia, just like the refugee scenes that we saw earlier in the trailer. Now those Lex bots I mentioned also appeared in Superman for All Seasons. Now here we see Superman flying away from fire. This is probably the fire the monster sprayed at him earlier, but you could also say this is him escaping the hell of the DCEU. Well guys, that was another fun ScreenCrush video for another perfect day here in the ScreenCrush universe. Gosh, I love you guys, I love our fans, and I love my job.
Yeah, it sure is great being us.
I hate that ScreenCrush and Ryan Airy. You see, Paul from the Heavy Spoilers channel, I also hate small dogs because obviously I'm a bad person. Now I know something that's really going to get them. I'm going to send them to a far away, far distant city where they can never come back. I'm sending them to
Los Angeles, California.
Well, I don't know, boss. That seems kind of mean.
Shut up or I'll give you a fresh one. Now activate the Destructo Beam.
That's right, guys. As a reminder, we are going on tour, and you can check out the link below for a special 20% off discount for our 8 shows next year. We are so excited about it. And also, don't forget to check out our Up, Up, and Away shirt that's for sale at our merch store. The link for that is below. So, what did you guys think of the trailer? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.